What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Y'all asked for it, so I built it. This is my DIY 270-degree awning. Today I'm going to show you guys how to build it. Alright, super excited to share this build with you guys. Worked really hard on it and I think it's my best one yet. This build requires no sewing, no welding. It will fit any vehicle with a standard crossbar roof rack, and I spent less than $200. So I'm really excited about this project. Now in the last video we built this little camp chair. If you haven't seen that, go check it out. And I also announced the giveaway of this chair. I'm going to extend the deadline for those that are watching this video. So if you want to be a part of the camp chair giveaway, I'll have a link in the description below. So y'all be sure to hit like, hit subscribe, go enter the giveaway. And with all that said, let's get into this video. Alright guys, welcome back to the shop. We're about to jump into this build. Now one thing you're going to notice right away, especially if you watch the video on the first awning, is we're going to be using a lot of the same methods and techniques for this 270 awning. We have our aluminum angle that we're going to use for our C-channel. We're going to be building another big beefy C-channel for this. We got our Mr. Long Arm paint poles that we're going to be using. And then we got the same roll of heater hose. Show you that little trick in a little bit. So if you haven't seen the first video that I put out on that awning, definitely go check that out. We're going to be doing a lot of the same things. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start working on our big 8-foot C-channel piece. Now, one question I got in the comments of the first video is why didn't you just buy a piece of C-channel that fits your needs? I tried looking for a piece of C-channel locally. They didn't have my size, first of all, and the closest size, the minimum requirement for that to purchase is like a 20-foot piece, and it was almost $300. So that was out of the question. I also looked online. The online prices look pretty good until you go to checkout, and then the price skyrockets because that's usually going to be a freight shipping charge. So we're going to opt for finding everything at the local box store. We got everything at Lowe's. Just like before, we're using aluminum angle. This is 8 foot long, 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. It's 1/8 inch thick. Got 2 pieces of that. And then the only difference between this C-channel and the last one is this piece right here. We're going to be using a 1.5 inch piece of aluminum flat bar that will space these 2 pieces of angle out. So instead of it being 3 inches wide, it's going to be 4.5 inches wide. So yeah, let's start getting this piece of C-channel put together. Now, just like before, we're going to be using an 1/8 inch thick piece of steel. We're going to cut these in sections of 4.5 inches because that's how wide our C-channel is going to be. And we're basically going to mount these on the back side of our C-channel just like we did before to hold all the pieces together and keep it all rigid. And we'll also be attaching these big L brackets. This is how we'll mount this big piece of C-channel to the vehicle. So this will also help hold it together. All right, we got our flat bar cut to 4.5 inches. We're gonna mount these just like before, directly under there, and get that riveted up. So we'll drill it, paint it, and then rivet it. And we gotta do one at a time. So you gotta do this one before you can move on to the other ones. Otherwise your holes might not line up. Our flat bar piece is all primed and painted. About to get our rivets together and mount this thing up. All right. We are done. Simple enough, just attached 4 pieces of flat bar, just riveted those together. It's nice and solid. This thing is so massive. Next thing we need to do is we need to move to the pivoting side. We're gonna build the pivot for this thing. If you remember in the first video, we did a pivot on each end. We're not gonna do that. We're gonna do 4 pivots all on one side. So let me show you how we're gonna do that. Now we're going to take our 5" quarter 20 thread and run it through all these. The only thing else we need to do is we need to space these out evenly. I'm going to cut some sections of this rod like we did in the first video. Cut some sections of rod to put in between each piece to space it all out. So starting with the washers, I'm going to start with 3 washers. And then we'll do a washer, one of our spacers, another washer, conduit. Repeat this process. There we go. Washer on the end. Lock nut. Boom, there we go. Alright, so before we move on, we need to cut a piece out of the back of our C-channel so that this bottom piece can rotate all the way around so we can get 270 degrees. Alright, we got our pivot all set up. This looks really good. Now if you've seen my previous video, you know exactly what we're about to do, but I'll explain it if you hadn't seen that video. Now we're going to have 4 poles that run the length of our C-channel that will deploy our awning. And the reason we have these pieces here is that when you go to open up your awning, your poles will open up like this. And you need to be able to set the poles on the ground as you're setting up your awning. So it's going to want to drop like that. If it was attached here, something would end up breaking. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this, which is just a short section of heater hose that I found at Lowe's. It's just the perfect diameter. This stuff bends. So what we're going to do is we're going to have this attached to each one of our pieces here. And then the other end is going to attach to our pole. That way the hose bends and doesn't break off this pivot piece. So yeah, it's just a super cheap, simple solution. Use it with my other awning and it works perfectly and I've had no issues with it. So yeah, we're gonna cut up several pieces of our heater hose. We'll attach it to our conduit and then we'll attach it to each pole. The reason I'm using these paint poles is just because they're aluminum, they're really light. You could also use just a piece of conduit, cut it 8 feet. But I want to try to make this thing as light as possible. One thing I forgot to mention if you're using these paint poles is we're going to remove all these collars off each pole. We don't need them for what we're doing. All right, let's test this thing out. I have all the poles shortened up right now. This top one will pivot the least. My there. So we'll go about there. This one comes, and this one will pivot all the way 270 degrees. Just like that. Dude, this is gonna be perfect. Really happy with this. All the pieces will just fold back. All right, I got it mocked up on the vehicle. I'm just measuring where my crossbars are so that I can mount that L bracket to our C channel. All right, let's get these guys mounted up. Got the structure of the awning all laid out so you can see what that looks like. So now I'm working on figuring out the fabric for this particular build. Now my finished product, I'm gonna be using a ripstop material, but before I do that, I'm gonna build this thing out of tarp material that you can get from Lowe's or Home Depot, just a cheap tarp. The reason I'm doing that, there's two reasons. First reason, I know a lot of people out there they like to build these out of tarps. It's cheap, easy, and you don't have to mess with the sewing machine. The other reason I'm using tarp first is because if I have some kind of design flaw, I'd rather figure it out before spending a lot of money on nicer material. So we're about to get the tarps laid out. I'm using two different size tarps for this. I'm using a 15.5 by 11 piece that goes this way, and then over here I'm using a piece that's 9 foot by 11, so I think that should cover it just fine. So let's get all that laid out. All right, I want to pause the video right here real quick. I know some of you guys are probably judging me for using tarp and duct tape for this project, but I wanted to stop and I wanted to run a few experiments on how strong this tarp and duct tape is. Since I'm going to be upgrading mine to ripstop fabric, I don't really care a whole lot about this, but I wanted to show you guys, especially those that want to resort to this cheaper option. So we're going to run a little experiment. I got 4 different pieces of tarp material. The first one is just a butt joint, so we got the fabric butted up and then we have it taped on both sides. So yeah, let's see how strong this is. I'm just gonna pull on it from each side and see how hard it is to separate this. Oh my gosh. That's not coming apart. So the butt joint, that's really strong. The next one is the tarp is overlapped. So we have it taped here and then on the back side it's taped right here. So it's kind of offset. Dang. I thought this one would break for some reason. I thought this one might come apart. So there you have it. The two Gorilla Tape options with the poly tarp, that is super strong. It is not coming apart. And I was curious if you could sew this material, and if so, how strong is it? So I've got one that is just a single stitch down this edge. Oh! Well, I started at the top, so it failed kind of at the top and split down, but still pretty strong. It took a lot of effort to tear that apart. And then this final piece, I have it double stitched. Just like that. Show you what cross on that. That's really strong. Yeah, you can see it separating at where the stitches are, but that is still super stout. But dang, I'm really really surprised by this tape. This is really interesting. I thought that this was going to be a lot weaker than it is. All right, back to the video. So we have it taped along our C-channel to hold that in place. And then right there we have the two tarps that came together, tape that up. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start making those A to B cuts all the way around, just like that. I'm gonna use this 2x4 to mark straight lines. What I think I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna use some Gorilla Tape. I'm gonna tape out the lines first and then cut along the tape. That way the tarp doesn't fray. I think you could actually use a torch to singe the ends to keep it from fraying, but I'm not gonna end up doing that. Let's start marking our edges and start cutting this out. Got it all cut out. I think this looks really good. I think it's time to get it on the car and see how it does. Since this isn't a freestanding awning, I'm just going to be using this 1/2-inch conduit to hold it up. I'll eventually upgrade this to the adjustable paint poles, the same ones I use for the build, so I can adjust the height of them from 4 feet to 8 feet depending on what I want to do. But I'm still kind of testing things out right now, so we're being cheap. So what I did was I flattened the end of this, cut a little key out, and that fits in the end of the paint pole. So let's get it opened up and test this thing out. All right, I'd love to know what y'all would do differently, but check it out. This actually looks pretty good. Got about 6 to 8 inches of clearance. Got plenty of clearance over the doors. I know how concerned y'all were about that in the first video. But yeah, this looks pretty good. I actually thought we were gonna have a whole lot of sag in the material. But the great thing about these poles is that if it is sagging somewhere, you can just tighten that up and it'll just kind of flatten out. I just made some little tape pockets for each pole end using that Gorilla Tape. Look how much space there is under here. This is awesome. On this back side, I just have it pulled and attached to our roof rack back here with some straps. But man, yeah, I'm actually really happy with this. Now, like I said, I'm not gonna keep the tarp material. I'm gonna switch it out for some ripstop material. I just don't think this is gonna hold up very well over time. But if you're looking for something that's easy and relatively cheap to replace, this might be your option. All right guys, the last thing we need to talk about is the cover. So let's get this thing packed up and I'll show you guys the cover that we're gonna use for this build. All right, there's a time when doing it yourself makes sense and there's a time when it doesn't. I actually purchased this online for much cheaper than I could have built it for, and it's a lot better quality. This is actually an ARB touring replacement cover. I just have the cover flipped around so that you can't see the ARB logo on this thing. I bought it for about $45 and that included shipping. It's just a lot cheaper. It's built a lot better than I could have done it. But yeah, I'll link this in the description below. Really easy to just slip on. But I'm not gonna lie, with the Tarp material, this thing is a really, really tight fit. It is pretty tough to get it in here. So I think once I switch over to the ripstop material, it'll fit a lot nicer just because that material is so much thinner. But really happy to know that it does work. But yeah, this thing looks really good. I think it's gonna work really well. Really happy with it. All right guys, I hope y'all have enjoyed this build. Like I said, I am gonna be upgrading this awning with actual ripstop material, so y'all be looking out for that. Y'all be sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can be notified for future videos. Also, let me know if there's a project you'd like to see me tackle. We'll see you in the next video.